We are taking a deeper look today at the impact of Kendrick Lamar's Pulitzer Prize win that was announced yesterday and the impact of Beyonce's Coachella headlining that paid tribute to historically black colleges.
Our next guests say these institutions need hip-hop culture in order to stay relevant. Welcome to the show, Dr. Greg Carr, Chair of Afro-American Studies at Howard University, and Elahe Izadi, pop culture writer at the Washington Post. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, how big of a deal is this?
This is a huge deal. I mean, winning a Pulitzer for a hip-hop artist wasn't even considered in the realm of possibility. And not just for a hip-hop artist, but really any commercially successful artist. Only classical and jazz musicians have won this accolade. And so for someone like Kendrick Lamar, who is one of the most streamed artists of this past year, to win this award, I mean, it was a remarkable shock, really.
Well, I think that for me, I think black institutions should be the ones that kind of validate these things. So for me, the Pulitzers really aren't relevant in terms of validation, and I think they're playing catch up. I mean, really, I mean, you think about it, this probably isn't the first hip-hop Pulitzer. You could probably make the argument that Lin-Manuel Miranda gets that last year for Hamilton in another category. They snubbed Duke Ellington in the 60s. The next year, they could have considered John Coltrane's A Love Supreme, but they didn't. They gave one to Scott Joplin posthumously, and then they give one to Wynton Marsalis, kind of maybe as a catch-up. So who knows? I mean, I think these institutions have to remain relevant, and in order to remain relevant, they can't continue to ignore the fact that people are turning away from them. So, you know, Kendrick, I don't know, I think probably To Pimp a Butterfly would have been more appropriate, but so in some ways, I think this is kind of a gesture toward trying to remain relevant for the Pulitzers.
Well, and for an institution like the Pulitzers to do that, I mean, we would have seen that in award shows, and even they've been getting some flack for the people they've chosen as winners. So does it make it even bigger of a statement, though, that it's an institution like the Pulitzers? Last people you probably would have expected.
Right. I mean, one of the things that really stands out about this is that Kendrick Lamar has not won an Album of the Year at the Grammys, especially the past year when everyone kind of thought he would win. So I think next year's awards at the Grammys are going to be very interesting. A lot of people will be paying attention to that. But the Pulitzers and institutions like that, they're not industry awards. They are able to maybe push the boundaries a little bit, and then that puts the pressure on these more industry-focused spaces to uphold hip-hop culture.
And there's an art culture complex at play too. If you look at the Pulitzer board, the bigger board, there are several non-Europeans on there. I mean, you got, you know, Diaz is on there, Eugene Robinson, Elizabeth Alexander, very familiar here in D.C. And going back, Danielle Allen and others, I'm quite sure, particularly when you read the description they gave as to why they gave Kendrick, there's a little bit of condescension in there. I think there's probably some, even though it was a unanimous selection, I think what you're probably looking at is a little bit of a culture war going on, even inside the ranks. And then finally, you have to apply for these. So some of this is about the industry pushing Kendrick. I mean, he's a great artist, but let's be clear, there are a lot of great artists. How much of this is the industry trying to position itself going forward? And
when you talk about the industry, maybe it's Kendrick Lamar's team saying, hey, it's time we're recognized beyond the realm of awards that we would typically get. But you did mention about the board and who's picking these awards. Traditionally, have they been a diverse, multicultural group of people?
Yeah, I mean, when you listen to the jurors for music and they discuss how they even arrived at this decision, initially they were discussing another piece of music that was influenced by hip hop. And for them to then think, well, why aren't we then considering hip hop music if it's worthy as an influence on the music that we're considering? And so then that sparked a broader philosophical conversation. And the way the jurors have talked about this after the fact was, yeah, it was a robust debate, even though they arrived at the decision unanimously, but it makes you wonder, 10 years ago, would that conversation even have happened?
No, I doubt that. I mean, when Duke was up for this kind of life body of work citation, the jurors from the music division submitted it to the larger board. They said no, and 2 jurors quit. I mean, so I doubt very seriously this would have been it. I think you're right. And who wants to be left behind in history? So, of course, you know, once unanimous, once you agree to do that. And then the other thing that comes to mind is the fact that perhaps Kendrick Lamar and Group is exactly how it should be narrated. because it wasn't just Kendrick Lamar who put that album together. You got Rihanna is on there, U2. In other words, maybe that fits better in another category like the Pulitzers for the Times or the Post, where you see the whole group get it. So they may still have a little bit more work to do to recognize everybody who created that piece.
The announcement of Kendrick Lamar came on the heels of Baychella, as they're calling it, Beyonce at Coachella, which, you know, when those that didn't know Coachella or really have never been, to me it was always kind of a indie artist, hippie kind of thing. So for somebody like Beyonce to headline something, what do you think about that whole scene?
Well, this concert was through and through inspired and really celebrating historically black colleges and a lot of the culture of the South. And it was so fascinating because after the fact, Beyonce's mom wrote on her Instagram that she was worried that, and she told her daughter, she was worried that this predominantly white audience would not understand and get the performance she was putting together, but that Beyonce told her mother, well, just because I feel like I have a responsibility now, that I've worked this hard to have this platform, and I want to do what I think is right, not necessarily what is most popular. But in doing so, because it's Beyonce, because the level at which she brought this performance of more than 100 musicians and dancers on stage, she pushed forward culture. I mean, she's not someone who's following a trend, maybe
She's
breaking
setting
a
the
trend.
trend for
She's
sure,
creating culture, and because of the Coachella live stream, everyone around the world could watch. So even if people in the audience didn't totally get the references, a lot of people around the world
Well, I'm
did.
sure they enjoyed it. And Dr. Carr, working at it historically, a black college, university, do your students even revere the Pulitzers and these awards the same way a generation ago people did?
I think they do, but thankfully they don't as much. I don't think they should at all, quite frankly.
Why not?
Well, because, you know, there are other bodies that should be convened to talk about what's quality. The Pulitzers and the Grammys are playing catch up. I mean, if they didn't have to do this, they wouldn't. But as people turn away from them, you'll see this response. Same thing with Beyonce. HBCUs, having gone to HBCU, having worked at working at HBCU, what Beyonce did was not a secret to everybody. I mean, I'm an alpha, so everybody's like, that's the alpha step right there.
Yeah.
That's the I was in a
That's every
marching
year
band.
at homecoming
Every
on the
year,
yard at
that's
Howard
every day
University.
at Howard, the probate. But I think what was important is every generation produced artists that are representative figures. So Beyonce is representing something that has always existed, and to her credit, as a sister from Texas, and I know Texas Southern went wild when they saw her there, you know, what she's doing is saying, this is who we've always been. Either come to us, particularly in this country with the shifting demographic, or get left behind in history. So, you know, she probably did Coachella a favor.
What other awards would you say should be looked at by society as a whole, in addition to the Pulitzers and the name brand awards?
I think it'll be a beautiful day when the NAACP Image Awards or the Spingarn Medal or the work of the Zora Neale Hurston and Richard Wright Foundation here in D.C. becomes something that people aspire to before they aspire to a Pulitzer or a Penn Faulkner or a Grammy or an Emmy. And that's the day when we'll see that this art culture complex, this war we fight for validation, that's when you say something like Black Lives Matter because you're trying to convince somebody of your humanity. I really don't use the phrase because at the end of the day, I know my life matters. My question is, do other people know? And I think we have to validate ourselves first as human beings, and then we begin building the kind of society we want. And so that to me, that's where we have to move. Yeah.
Well, one of the greatest things is it has opened up conversations like these, and we wish we could talk to you all show long, but thank you so much for bringing the insight to all the big news. We will be right back after this.